Herbs and spices have been with mankind as long as vegetation has been with mankind. We've added herbs and spices to our food as flavoring, but we've also put them to work as preservative, as preventative tonic, and even as a medicine. Now, if you were to ask the question why we add herbs and spices to our food, it's simply answered by saying there's something about the distinctive flavor, texture, or aroma of an herb and spice that we find compelling. Let's start by taking a look at one of the most pervasive flavorings embraced by almost every culture in the world: salt and pepper. Salt is where I'd like to begin. Salt is often miscategorized as a spice. It's not a spice at all, it's a mineral. It's one of the only rocks that we eat. Now, there's a whole selection of salts here. All of this salt comes from seawater. Some of it's been trapped underground, and as it dehydrates, it crystallizes, and then it can be mined from underground. But at some point, it was all seawater. There are salts here along the back that I use quite a bit of. Here is kosher salt. It's my all-time favorite. A very pure salt, and because it's ground more coarsely, they don't need to add anything to it to make it flow freely or keep from caking up. So there is kosher salt. Right next door is iodized salt. Iodine is one of the first, actually the first food additive approved by the US government, and they decided to put it into salt because salt was a foodstuff that was so pervasive. This iodized salt is ground a little bit more finely, and so they need to add things to it to keep it from caking up or to keep it flowing freely. There's also a flavor that goes along with the iodine that's added to it, so it's not as true a flavor as kosher salt from my perspective. On this end, I have something called sel gris, or gray salt. This is simply seawater that has been dehydrated until finally all of the water has gone out of it, and everything that was inherent in the seawater is still in that salt. It has more complexity. Certainly it has more minerals. There may even be some plant or animal life that makes its way into that salt. There are health claims that are made for salt like that. I'm a chef. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a biologist, and so I'll leave the health claims to other people. But with salt like this, I do find the flavor compelling and complex, and for that reason I like it. Here is a salt called Maldon salt, and it is an unrefined salt. The thing that's really nice about this is that as it crystallizes, it takes on a very, very delicate flaked conformation, so that when you put it onto food and it crunches on your tongue, it sort of breaks apart very, very easily. I segregated a few of the flakes here, and maybe you can see that it dries in sort of a conical pyramid formation. It's really a delicious salt. Along the back here, my back, your front, there's a number of different salts, and I'll just rattle off quickly what they are. This is a Hawaiian salt that has a lot of clay in it that turns it sort of an orange pinkish color. This is a Japanese sea salt. Over here, I have a salt that's been smoked, and so it has a smoky flavor to it. This comes from Scandinavia, and this salt right here is another sea salt. But unlike this Maldon salt that has the flaky texture, this tends to be a little bit rockier and harder. So I'd want to give this a chance to dissolve, or maybe I would grind it in a mortar and pestle. 99% of the time, I use kosher salt, and then I reach for one of these other salts so that I've got some variety available to me. The finer the salt is ground, the more aggressive it will seem on your palate. So a finely ground salt like this may go on to popcorn as popcorn salt and be very, very salty and encourage you to buy soft drinks. Some of these others, a little bit less aggressive on the palate. Let me pull this back, and I'm going to bring some pepper to the fore. I've got 3 different peppers right here: black pepper, green pepper, and white pepper. They all come from the same plant, and I'll tell you very, very briefly how they're made. All of these peppercorns start as a fresh green peppercorn, like this one in the middle. To take this and turn it into black pepper, the pepper is soaked very, very briefly and then dried, and enzymatic browning can take hold, and you see it go from green to brown like this. As it dries, the outside begins to crinkle up or shrink up, and that's what gives it this particular conformation. If instead I took the green peppercorn and I soaked it and fermented it for about a week, I could then grind the outside off and I would have white peppercorns. Now, some people like the flavor of the green peppercorns because it is vegetal. Others say they like black pepper because it has a fuller, richer, almost roasted flavor. And then there's some that will tell you that white peppercorn is appropriate for white preparations like a bechamel or mashed potatoes where you don't want to see flecks of black in your food. If you're honest with yourself and you close your eyes and you taste these three peppers, you'll notice them as very different. Green tastes vegetal. It has the burn of pepper but tastes very green and vegetal. Black has a full, rich, satisfying flavor. And then the white peppercorn tastes a little bit sour to me. And for that reason, I'm not a big fan of it. But you can make the decision yourself whether you like white, green, or black peppercorns. Now, one more. This is an outlier. This is Szechuan peppercorns, and it's not a true peppercorn. It's very popular in Szechuan, and it's popular because they have a word to describe what this does to your palate. It has sort of a numbing effect on your palate. If you take it in and you chew it up, very quickly you'll find that your cheek and your tongue have gone numb. And they actually like that quality in their food. That characteristic of Szechuan peppercorn, its numbing quality, can be downplayed a little bit by toasting that spice in a pan before you grind it up and use it. But I think of this not as a true peppercorn, but simply as an outlier. So here we have it. Salt and pepper. Before we move on, just let me share with you that salt has very powerful antimicrobial properties, and that's quite possibly one of the reasons that we add it to our food. And pepper is protective against botulism, but more than that, it makes bacteria more susceptible to the plant chemicals that are found in herbs and spices. So in a real way, there's a protective benefit to be gained from salt and pepper more than just flavor. It's almost as if our appreciation of salt and pepper and our liking of salt and pepper is a learned behavior. So let's take a little bit of a look at herbs. Now, when you think of the difference between herbs and spices, herbs come from plants, but they tend to be the tender, leafy parts of the plant, whereas spices are seeds, roots, stems, and tougher parts of the plant. For that reason, sometimes the area between herbs and spices can get muddied just a little bit. I have here a selection of fresh herbs. We're lucky enough to have a beautiful herb garden out front, and you can see, I'll just rattle them off quickly. Lemon verbena, I've got thyme that's in flower right now. Tarragon, Italian parsley, and curly parsley. I've got mint, chives and garlic chives, sage down here in the front, and then basil as well. All different types of herbs. If you want to classify them, one easy way to do it is between resinous herbs and tender herbs or fine herbs. And there's a good reason for doing that. The resinous herbs tend to dry very, very well because of the oils and resin in them, while the fine herbs don't dry nearly as well. As an example, parsley is a fine herb or a delicate herb, and while you can find it in the store dried, I don't think there's anything to recommend it. It doesn't have much flavor. Its color is not nearly as vibrant as it is when it's fresh. So I can't think of a good reason to buy dried parsley. The good news is that fresh parsley is readily available. On the other hand, resinous herbs like rosemary or thyme or even bay leaf are herbs that dry marvelously well. And in fact, some people actually prefer the dried herb to the fresh because the dried herb tends to calm down a little bit. Rosemary, when it's fresh, can be very powerful and resinous and piney, and the dried herb, while it's still strong, is not nearly as aggressive. There's also here some aromatic herbs, things like mint and sage, which because of their strong aroma seem to dry pretty well. And for that reason, you may find that you've got some dried rubbed sage in your pantry. That is an herb that is handy to have on hand, especially around the holidays, especially around Thanksgiving. Mint as well, when it's dried, still makes a delicious mint tea, and the aroma of that tea is every bit as powerful as it would be if it's fresh, just a little bit changed. Now, I have some dried herbs up front. This is dried thyme, and this is fresh thyme, so fresh and dried. It might surprise you to know that you actually use less of the dried herb than you would when it's fresh. It may seem counterintuitive. You might decide that fresh is going to be more vital and stronger, and so you would need less of it. But the reality is that there's more water in fresh herbs, and water doesn't really have flavor. So when you dry an herb, typically I use 1/2 to 1/3 as much. 1/2 to 1/3 dried would translate into twice or 3 times as much fresh. And that's just a great rule of thumb to have on hand. Whether we're talking dried herbs or fresh, recognize that herbs, as a rule, are perishable. They don't last forever. It's easy to see when a fresh herb is starting to wilt or even start to decay a little bit. It's less easy to tell when a dried herb is old. But there's one rule that I would share, and that is simply grab it and smell it. And if it no longer smells like the herb that it is, it's time to move on. I would say at home, as long as you keep them sealed and in the jar, they can live probably pretty happily in your cupboard for about a year or so. After that, you might think about replacing them. All right, let me move this aside. I'm going to make a very quick herb chutney that comes from India. Now, every culture embraces spices and herbs in a different way. Here's thyme. This is something, a mix called herbes de Provence. These are herbs from the south of France. And here's a Mediterranean spice mix that I bought that has oregano and parsley and a little bit of garlic in it as well. But we're going to deal with a fresh herb chutney from India. It's pretty simple to put together, and I'm going to use this chutney in a dish that also features spices later on. So here's what this looks like. I've got some cilantro. It's an aromatic herb. I'm just going to break it in half and drop it into the blender. I'm going to add some chilies. This is a Serrano chili. It's a pretty big one. I may not use the entire thing. Otherwise, it could be too spicy, but I'm going to add 3 chunks. I'm going to put a little bit of onion in here. This is green onion, and I'm going to cut that into chunks as well. And then finally, I want this chutney to be very aromatic. And to that end, I'm going to put some mint. And I just want the leaves. The stems can be a little bit tough. And so I'm going to take the leaves off and add them to the blender. And I think with that done, we're just about ready to turn this blender on. Now, to get this to spin, I may have to add some liquid. And the liquid I'm going to use is lime juice, which is an ingredient in this recipe anyhow. I'll squeeze the lime juice in. And you don't want too much moisture in here, but a little bit will help the herbs catch in the blender and start to liquefy themselves. So I'm going to press this down, and let's see how we make out here. As you can see, this is pureed. I'm going to taste it very, very briefly. and it's time to season. It needs salt, and I'm going to add salt to it. And I want to bring out the sweetness of those herbs with a little bit of sugar as well. This chutney, this mint and cilantro chutney, is something that we're going to serve later on with a cheese that has popped spices added to it. All right. We're almost there. A little bit more salt and sugar. And this is a very, very popular chutney in India. Chutney as a word means to lick. And typically what you can expect is a very strong, sweet, sour flavor. In this case, the sour comes from lime and the sweetness from the sugar that we added. So this chutney is very, very popular in India. You can see that it is not too thin, so I didn't put too much water in there. It has nice consistency, and the flavor should be strong with aromatics and then sweet and sour at the same time. We'll use this later on with a dish of fresh cheese with popped spices and aromatic green chutney. I'd like to show you another recipe right now, a roasted tomato and saffron vinaigrette that utilizes one of the most expensive herbs you will ever buy, and that's saffron. I have some right here. Saffron is the stamen from a very tiny little crocus, and each blossom has 3 or 4 threads of saffron only, and they have to be hand harvested. That's the reason it's so expensive. Just a quick word or two about quality. The male portion of the saffron or the crocus is a little yellow thread, while the female portion, more desirable, is a red thread. So if you see saffron with too many yellow threads in it, that's indicative of poor quality. Certainly if you buy saffron that's been ground to a powder already, they can put as much of that male thread in there as they like, and you'll be none the wiser. So I would recommend that you buy saffron in threads just like this. Now what you're after from saffron is the aroma, but also the color. And you want to protect both of those things by keeping it dry, 1, and protecting it from light, 2. I usually keep it in a little tin can in my pantry, and inside the can, I have it enclosed in a little plastic bag. Kept like that, it usually keeps very, very nicely for a year or more. If what you're after is color and aroma, then you would be well advised to soak it to draw the color and aroma out. And I have it soaking in 3 different things here. Here I have it soaking in oil, and as you can see, there is no color and no aroma that comes out. It's as if the oil encapsulates the saffron and keeps everything trapped inside. Here in the middle, I soaked it in some milk, and inasmuch as there is fat in milk, you can see that while I'm getting some color, maybe not as much as I would like. And then finally here, I put it in warm water, and very quickly it gives up its flavor and its aroma. So soaking it in a little bit of water is a great idea. So let's make this wonderful saffron and roasted tomato vinaigrette. What I've done is I've taken the flavors of bouillabaisse, which is a tomato and saffron seafood stew that you'll find in the south of France, and I built it into a vinaigrette. Let's get started. As an emulsifier, a little bit of mustard, and then shallots and garlic both go into this. And I'm going to add some vinegar, just to bring the flavors of both of those elements out. Take a look at what I have here. I've got capers. We'll add those. Chopped thyme, orange zest, and to your taste, some pepper flakes. Don't overdo it. And then finally, our saffron. Threads and all. I've got some tomatoes here, all chopped up. What I did with them is I roasted them. You can roast them under the broiler or on the grill. They will blacken on the outside, which is as it should be, but more importantly, the flesh of the tomato completely collapses. So you want them to be cooked. And once they're cooked, you'll see how easily the skin will peel away. I just peeled the skin away and then chopped up the pulp, seeds, liquid, everything, kept it all together, and I'm going to introduce that to my vinaigrette. Now, we're going to add some olive oil, and I'm going to stir it in with a whisk so that it stays as kind of a loose emulsion. This is a nice mild French olive oil. Just about 3 times as much oil as vinegar. And because there's so much moisture in those tomatoes, this will emulsify fairly easy. It will hold as a loose emulsion. And even if it separates, all you need to do is stir it or shake it up, and it will come back together again. All right. I'm going to season it with salt. We have some pepper flakes in there already. I'm going to add just a little bit of orange juice to this as well, just because I love that orange flavor side by side with saffron. And then maybe the secret ingredient of all the ingredients is pastis, the anise-flavored liqueur that makes its way into a bouillabaisse. Remember that vinaigrettes, if they taste good off the spoon, are probably not assertive enough. So I added some more salt, a little bit more Pernod. It's delicious. This is ready to go. This vinaigrette is great to have on hand. It's good with fish, it's good with grilled meat, grilled vegetables. I love to take chicken breasts and stuff them with goat cheese and grill those, and I love this vinaigrette on all of those things. One of my favorite ways of using this vinaigrette is on a really delicious piece of fish. When we come back, we're going to take a look at spices distinct from herbs. So let's talk about spices. If herbs represent the leafy, tender parts of a plant, then spices are really all about the seeds, the roots, the stems, and the woodier parts of the plants. You can see what I have here, a selection of spices. I've got whole spices down the back, coriander. I have mustard seed in 2 different colors, black and tan. And then finally some cumin seeds. Up here I have ground spices, and then some spice mixtures in the form of dry mixtures and also a paste. Now, some of these mixtures have been with us for a long, long time. Mankind has learned that they taste great together or they provide a protective benefit. As an example, I have pickling spice here, and when you pickle vegetables, making sure that they last a long time is really an important consideration, and pickling spices can help with that. My recommendation with spices, if you can do it, is to buy them whole and then grind them as you need them, because these are perishable just as herbs are perishable. When they no longer smell like what they are, then I think it's time to get rid of them. If you have them whole, having a spice grinder like this or a little coffee grinder that you reserve just for that use is an important tip. If you use it for coffee and for spices, there's no guarantee that one day your coffee doesn't taste like curry or the next day your curry tastes like coffee. When you have whole spices, one of the great things that you can do is you can toast them. And that really rounds out the flavor, makes it much richer, less aggressive. So I want to show you that process very, very quickly. I have a hot pan here, and I'm going to put some cumin seed into the pan. And I'm going to turn the heat up high, and we'll swirl them in the pan. Now, initially, you won't see much happening. But very, very quickly, as the heat hits those herbs, you'll start to get the aroma of those herbs coming out of the pan. The longer the herbs are on the heat and the hotter the pan is, the more you have to concern yourself with keeping them moving. Once you've smelt the aroma, the next thing you should keep your eye out for is the color of the spice beginning to darken just slightly. And if you can have some that are untoasted side by side with those that you're toasting, it can help to compare back and forth. The next thing that you will see is you may see a wisp or two of smoke coming off the pan. I'm seeing it right now. I'm not sure that you can. When you see smoke, keep the spices moving. There you see the smoke coming off. And then towards the end, you may see just one or two seeds popping. Depending on what the seed is, it may pop almost like popcorn. By the time you see this smoke, it's important to keep this moving almost constantly. And then finally, take it out of the hot pan so that it can cool and not burn from the heat of the pan. All right, that's toasting. I'm going to show you how to take that technique and leverage it to make a preparation called dukkha, which is a spice mix from the Eastern Mediterranean around Egypt. Basically, I have toasted sesame seeds, toasted cumin, toasted coriander, and toasted hazelnuts. And what I'm going to do is combine them into the spice grinder and just grind them up into a fine powder. You need to be a little bit careful. With nuts in there, if you grind for too long, what you'll discover is you get nut butter, and that's not what you want at all. Once you've got it ground up, you have a mixture that looks like this. I am going to add some salt to this as well, and likewise some black pepper. And we'll stir that all together. This mixture keeps pretty well for about a month in a plastic bag protected from air and moisture. And I'm going to spoon it right into a dish, and I'll show you how it's traditionally used. So if you look here, I've got a little bit of olive oil, some bread for dipping into the olive oil, and then the dukkha. And what you will see happening in the Eastern Mediterranean is that they will take the bread and dip it first into a really flavorful olive oil, and then into the dukkha. Whenever I taste this, it reminds me a little bit of the experience of eating garlic bread for the first time, where you get bread, yes, but so much more. This spice mixture cuts through the aggressive nature of the oil, and it flavors the bread in such a compelling way that you'll find yourself going back to oil and dukkha again and again and again. I'd like to show you another way of manipulating spices, this one from India, where they are masters at manipulating spices. We're going to take the chutney that we made earlier and use it to accompany a fresh cheese like this, fromage blanc, and I'm going to flavor that cheese with popped spices, almost the way that you might pop something like popcorn. So I have 4 separate spices, 2 different colors of mustard seed, cumin seed, and this is a seed called nigella. Nigella seed has kind of an oniony flavor. It comes from a plant that you may know from floral arrangements called love in a mist. But this black seed lends sort of a savory, oniony flavor. In a hot pan, I'm going to introduce some cooking oil. This is canola oil. And then I'm going to add the seeds. And I want to swirl those in the oil. And initially they're going to cook, and then they'll start to pop. You can hear it happening already. Have a lid close by and continue to cook them and swirl them for about 15 to 20 seconds. If I stop for long enough, you can hear the popping going on in here. You want to keep them moving so they don't burn. All right. So at this point, the spices have a much deeper, fuller flavor, and I'm going to use the spices and the oil that they cooked in to flavor this cheese. I like to put the cheese onto the plate so it's a little bit craggy, so there's plenty of places for the spices to collect. And then I'm going to take some of the chutney we made earlier and put that around the outside of this cheese. And then just some crispy bread. I've got some pita chips right here. And when you enjoy this, what you want is the bread, a little bit of the cheese, plus the spices, and then the chutney as well. And what you'll discover is that the spices are not just a flavoring, but also a textural element. They're nice and crunchy, and they really make this a satisfying dish. I'm going to show you a spice rub right now. Likely you have your own favorite spice rubs already. Maybe it's a barbecue rub that you put on pork. But I have a rub that's inspired by the Moorish occupation of Spain. So the spices are exotic. Take a look at what I've got. I have thyme and coriander, pepper flakes, a little bit of curry powder, paprika, and cumin. And I took all of those spices and I ground them together in this mix right here. I'm going to add that to some pork that's been diced up. This is a pork tenderloin. And then I took parsley, garlic, and lemon juice, and I'm going to introduce that to this pork as well. A big squeeze of lemon. And then finally some olive oil. And we're just going to stir this together and allow the meat to marinate. An hour is about all it needs. The nice thing about this marinade is that the meat will keep very well now because of the spices that are on the outside. So 3 or 4 days in the refrigerator should not be a problem at all. What I have here is the same meat that's already been marinated for a while, and I'm going to skewer it. This is traditionally served on skewers in tapas bars. I have some bamboo skewers, and I've soaked them in water so that when they go onto the hot grill, they won't catch fire and burn up. And what I'm going to do is put meat onto the skewers alternately with red grapes. So a grape, a piece of meat, another grape, another piece of meat, and then finally finish off with a grape. And I've got that done already right here. Let me bring it over. And we're going to grill these. They'll grill for maybe 8 minutes. I'm going to give them just a little bit more oil so that I don't run into any issues with sticking. And I did not put any salt into the rub, so when they go on the grill, I'll make a point of seasoning them with salt as well. All right, here we go. About 8 minutes is all these are going to take. After about 4, I will turn them, and then we'll have a chance to taste a really delicious pork preparation. So these have been cooking now for about 8 minutes. I'm going to take them off. They look great. They smell even better, but there's really no way for you to appreciate that unless you try them yourself. This is served as a tapas in tapas bars in Spain, and I like to stack them up just like this and let people dig right in. The nice thing about the grapes is that it gives you just a little bit of sweetness side by side with these exotic spices. Let me give it a drop or two of lemon juice, and we are good to go.